For this project, we need ribbon, scissors, thread, pins, metal loop, a pen, muslin fabric, chainmail, durable fabric that you can use to put the loop around, and lining. When picking your lining, it's important that it's not going to catch on the inside of the chainmail. You can test this by dragging it across your fabric. You're going to start out by placing 2 rectangles of fabric on a mannequin. You can do this on yourself as well. Placing pins on the side, you're going to create the shape of your skirt. Because we're using chainmail, it's important that we're not going to be placing any darts, so the lower the rise, the better the fit's going to be of the skirt. We're then going to use a pen to mark where we folded over the fabric in the front and the back, and then also mark the sides where we placed our pins. And now we have the 2 pieces of our pattern. We're now going to place our pattern down on our chainmail. I used fabric weights, but you can use anything you have around the house. I used a pair of old scissors because the chainmail fabric will dull your scissors. It's important to remember as well that the pattern that we created has no seam allowance because we will not be using seam allowance with the chainmail. And then we're going to do the same for the back piece as well. The chainmail can have a lot of movement in the fabric, so make sure that the pieces are placed as evenly as possible. We're then going to cut the pattern pieces out on our lining fabric, this time making sure to leave a 1 centimeter seam allowance. And again, this will be for the front and the back piece. And then you'll be left with the 4 pieces for your skirt. We're going to start by attaching the 2 side seams of our chainmail fabric using a hand needle. These 2 side seams should align perfectly, and if they don't, you can trim one of them down so that they do. And then row by row, you're just going to sew together the side seams with the hand needle. When you're doing this, I found that I didn't like to pull it too tight, but not too loose either. You can find a nice medium for the tension, just as long as it lies flat. And then at the bottom on the last row, you're going to tie it off with a knot. If you place your hand underneath, you can see if you've left any gaps. As you can see, I did here, so I went back over with my hand sewing needle and touched it up. It's also important that your hem's all the same length, so if you have an extra row, you can trim that down. You're now ready to sew the side seam of your lining. You're going to do this by pinning so that your 2 seams are facing each other once sewn. And then you're just going to sew across where you placed your pins. We're now ready to create the loops that we're going to place our metal rings through. I cut mine about 2.5 centimeters in width and made sure that I made enough for 12 loops. To iron, we're going to fold in both sides and then fold again in half. The goal is just to make sure that there's no exposed edges poking out. And then we're just going to sew with a straight stitch. Once you have your pieces sewn, you can thread them through the metal loops. And this is where I cut my 4 strips into shorter pieces. I decided to make 12 of these little loops, but it's totally up to you how many you'd like. We're now going to hem the lining by folding it over twice and ironing it. It's good if the lining is a little bit shorter than the actual chainmail skirt. And then we're just going to sew with a straight stitch. I use little clips to keep the chainmail and lining in place while I sewed, but these are optional. So we're going to fold the lining over 1 centimeter at the top and attach it to the chainmail. So as you can see, having the right side up of the chainmail, we're just tucking in the lining 1 centimeter and then laying it down. As for the sides, we're going to remember to place in our little loops and just disperse them evenly along the side. Again, it's up to you how many you'd like to place and how you'd like to disperse them. And then using our hand needle again, we're going to hand sew the lining to the chainmail skirt. This part can take a little while, but it's important to keep your patience and sew evenly. When you get to the bottom of your lining, you're just going to continue to sew and then attach it with a knot. When attaching the loops, it's nice to use a measuring tape to make sure that the 2 sides line up evenly and all of your loops are evenly dispersed. Now with your loops all attached and your lining all sewn in, you're ready to thread the loops with your ribbon. Depending on the thickness of your lining, you may want to secure it, so I did a final stitch just on the inside at the top. This made sure that the lining didn't poke out when I was wearing the skirt. And you're all done.